Quería hablar un poco de lo que es el anarcocapitalismo.
I wanted to talk about anarcho-capitalism and what it is for, because usually they tell me, "You are a utopian, what are you saying? What strange things you say? That doesn't exist. Such a thing can't exist." Let's discuss what it is for, let's see if you agree or not. So, the definition of anarcho-capitalism, the classical one, says that a stateless society is possible. Not only that it is possible, that it is desirable. That is the definition of anarcho-capitalism. And also, in order to work, it has to use the market. So, it is different from other forms of anarchy. Anarchies appear in the 19th century. It's an amalgamation of liberal and individualist anarchism. For example, the Americans, Spooner, Tucker, and especially Max Stirner, are some who use this approach, but mixed with other ideologies. Collectivist anarchism is a concoction of the classical socialist ideologies of the 19th century with anarchism. Ecological anarchism, 20th century, is a combination of environmentalism with anarchism, and anarcho-capitalism is a combination of anarchist ideologies with the capitalist system. And that's basically it. Why did I start studying these things? I was a classical liberal, normal and ordinary, as many of you may be, but I had a problem, an existential problem. My students asked me this sometimes, and I saw myself in trouble, in the sense that when there was a theoretical problem, a difficult problem, for example, security, defense, the roads, or attention to prisons, that is, controversial topics, who would provide the solution to them? I said, the state, the state, the state. Then I started to think, what's so peculiar about this? Why does the state have to provide security? What's so characteristic about it? If the state can provide security, it can also make cookies, it can also make screws, it can also distill oil. In fact, it does. Schumpeter said, "There is nothing in the world, no social benefit, that has not been provided at some point in history by the state." So, when I was arguing, I saw myself in trouble. What's so peculiar about this? Anarcho-capitalism is nothing more than liberalism taken to the extreme. It's the application of liberal principles, of market principles, in areas that are not usually provided by the market. For example, justice, security, and so on. Let's say the market could do everything, and this is a theoretical challenge, and I raise it as such. I am not a political activist. I don't want to start a revolution. I don't want you to take to the streets, to burn things to establish anarcho-capitalism. No. It is a philosophical program that can later have practical applications. And this is what I wanted to talk to you about today. What applications can it have, and what can it be used for? Although some people use it as a political movement, as it is done in the United States, but it's not my intention to create a movement, a party, a candidate, or anything like that. So let's see, what is this for? What use can it have? At least intellectual, what good can this do? First, the main elements of anarcho-capitalism, almost all of them are in classical liberalism, and above all, in French classical liberalism. The disciples of, say, Charles Comte, Charles de Noyer, and their followers like Molinari, all of them had some elements of anarcho-capitalism. The vision of the state of Benjamin Constant in The Spirit of Conquest and Usurpation is a very similar vision. Not exactly the same, but very similar to the one we have. The state as an entity that is born from conquest and predation. It is not something new in political thought. It is a negative view of the state. The idea of the market as a supplier of goods that can better assign resources is also present in them. The thing is that they don't develop the idea, especially because they are covered by official liberalism, official French liberalism of Guizot. The political liberals and the economic liberals always got along badly, at least in Spain, in France too, and I don't know about Argentina. But usually, political liberals, those who call themselves liberals, division of powers and things like that, get along quite badly with the economic liberals. The elements of anarcho-capitalism are not new, they are very common. Simply what the founders do, Molinari and Rothbard, is to synthesize them, elaborate them, and give them a consistent political doctrine. That's what they try to do. But again, it isn't something new. If you see articles and studies, you'll see many close elements of, for example, proto-Austrian economy and liberalism in the negative sense. Also, for example, authors like Spencer have elements of this kind. So it is not something new at all. Simply what it does is conform to it and develop a doctrine. The first one is Molinari in his essay on private defense. He is the first to raise the possibility of private defense services. So again, it's nothing new. Second, is it utopian? Yes and no. It is utopian in the sense that there is no society today that has these principles, but there have been many anarchist societies in history. In fact, any state historian will tell you this. The modern state is from the French Revolution to the present day, and the political power, the forms of political power, are 3,000 or 4,000 years old, and not widespread throughout the earth. That is, 99% of human history occurs in the absence of a state. A different thing is the will to live like this. That's a different topic. But the fact that the human being lived without a state and got here is evident. In many societies, this situation lasted until relatively recently. In that sense, it isn't utopian because it existed until recently, and it exists today in some areas that I'm going to mention. There is an anarchist anthropologist, his name is James Scott, who wrote several books. He suggests that, for example, much of the earth was stateless until the 19th century. He mentions several areas of the world, for example, much of Southeast Asia, areas of Africa, parts of America, and so on, that had no state until relatively recently. So, the state is a relatively new thing. Furthermore, Scott claims that people were escaping from the state. So, it isn't something that has never existed, but it was not a capitalist anarchy. It wasn't a form of anarchy that allowed a standard of living like the one we are experiencing now. So, it is not a debate of impossibility, but it is a debate of desirability, which is very different. Is it utopian, in the sense of changing a society like ours to an anarchist society? Yes, it is quite complicated. First, you must think about it, and you have to study it, and this is what I intend to do here. Discuss this with you. So, if you think with an Austrian mind, with an anarcho-capitalist mind, what you see is that anarchy is omnipresent. For example, is a company anarchist or not? Does a company operate in anarchy or not? Yes, because it does not operate with mandates. It operates through exchanges between participants. A church. I think the Catholic Church is the oldest institution in the world. Is it an anarchy or not? Yes, sometimes it makes alliances with the states. That's where the confusion comes from. But in many parts of the world, it operates against the state. As an institution, is it organized by mandates or by agreements? Does something happen to someone who leaves the church or stops believing? No. Usually nothing happens to them. Even a bishop, a cardinal, can they leave the church? Yes, they can leave the church. They will assume some costs. They will lose a relationship, but they can leave whenever they want. Companies are organized by prices, by economic means, and churches by ideological means. Both function in anarchy, and they work perfectly. A couple, a group of friends, how do they operate? They all operate perfectly as an anarchy, and they operate sometimes in a very, very, very stable way, just as a company can be very, very, very stable in the absence of power. The international system, the system of international states, how does it operate? There is no state that dominates all states. States operate among themselves in anarchy, and, like Professor Hedley Ball explains very well in his book, The Anarchical Society, despite being in anarchy, they are able to cooperate. For example, they created postal unions, they have extradition systems between them, they create institutions. All the institutions we see, many of international law, are created in anarchy, and the agreements are often respected, and it is an enormously stable system. As of today, I think there are almost no wars between states. Maybe the one between Yemen and Arabia can be considered, and some more, but the number of wars has reduced. In your region and in mine. In your region, in Latin America, there hasn't been a war between states for a long time. In Europe, there hasn't been a war between states for a long time either. It is not necessary to have a world government to guarantee peace between states. With trade, institutions, and agreements, they can perfectly cooperate. So, an anarchic society is not unthinkable, but not only that, the state itself internally operates in anarchy, and that's why it works so well. Proudhon said, "Anarchy is not the daughter of order, it is the mother of order." It's true. All these systems that I just mentioned, companies, churches, and so on, while operating in anarchy, are enormously stable. The states themselves, if they can work so well and operate in a coordinated manner to extract rents from the rest of society, it is because they are operating in anarchy. Among them, they do not operate by force mechanisms, by power mechanisms, but by agreements, which can be monetary pacts, salaries, or by some ideological loyalty, things like that. There is no power between them, and the proof is, for example, a coalition government in a country. Is that anarchy or not? Either party can leave. Any of the deputies can leave. A few may leave and overthrow a government. Within the states, there are conflicts between the different groups that make it up. How is a coup explained if it is not in the presence of anarchy? That is, when a group of officials, soldiers, or judges decide to face another part of the state and overthrow it. How can they do that? Simply because one of the parties does not command or has no power over the other. The agreements and the balance they had reached are broken, but not because one part has more power than the other. Each of the groups in the state is an anarchy, and within them, they are an anarchy too. The state is not for me the structure or the officials, but they are the people at the top. They are the 3,000 or 4,000 people that Mosca says dominate a country. A country, for example, the size of Argentina or Spain. There are a few hundred trained and coordinated, the ones who dominate a country. They are the ones that constitute the state. Then the state has a power structure. Officials, police officers, schools, universities, and so on help them maintain that. But among themselves they also operate in anarchy. Only in anarchy could they work so well. That is the point. Because they are incentive driven, not mandate driven. This was explained by an American libertarian named Alfred Kuzan, and I think it was worth developing. So, it's not utopian because you can see a lot of types of anarchy, but you don't see them with the eyes of an anarchist. You might think a church operates by mandates, but it doesn't. It commands only if the other wants to obey. As soon as someone doesn't want to obey, he leaves. If an employee wants to leave the company, he leaves, and that's it. It's impossible to make him come back, even if he is very much needed that day. There is no one who can make him come back if he wants to leave, because it's a different kind of relationship. They are not related by power, they are mutually beneficial. We must see the types of anarchy that exist in the world. Afterwards, it's useful to understand what they call public goods. If we take Paul Samuelson's or Richard Musgrave's definition, those definitions of public goods, market failures, and things like that, the logic that says that some goods can only be provided by the states because, if not, there would be stowaways. So, we must apply the Austrian analysis. We see them with different eyes, of course. Let's see. Defense. What is defense? Or security? Is the state the one that provides security, or is it provided by the people? As the American libertarian Jane Jacobs says in her book about security, is security provided by the state or by the people? The state has some kind of function to capture criminals and things like that, and sometimes it does this well. But who really maintains order and security? To what extent is it not more than a set of goods and services that can be bought? Most security is passive, not active. And what does security consist of? Well, you buy goods like doors, fences, you buy alarms, you buy homes in safe areas, you buy dogs, you can rent an apartment with a security guard, things like that. Usually, security is goods and services that can be bought. Even weapons in countries where they are allowed. They can be bought without any problem. In other words, it is not impossible. And then something else derives from there. Security, as I said, is passive, and it is provided by people. For example, abstaining from certain actions. There are certain places we don't go. There are certain hours when we don't go for a walk, and we avoid getting into trouble. We try to avoid that. I believe that 80% of security is that. For one reason. The state cannot prevent crime. The state is not there at the time of the crime. The state can capture the criminal, if they do it well, or maybe can dissuade him with arrest. But if someone commits a crime, you must defend yourself at the time of the crime. The state is rarely there to defend you, and that must be considered. So, can those security goods be provided by the market or not? What ways would there be of providing that? Anarcho-capitalism leads us away from intellectual laziness. It forces us to do archaeology, intellectual archaeology. How was it done before? How was it done in that location? How could it be done? How could you adapt anything, whatever the Chinese did, the Turks or whoever, to today's situations? And we see that there are many systems of this kind. Are state armies, for example, the best defense for a country? This topic was raised by a libertarian conservative author called Martin van Creveld, professor of military history in Israel. Is there really going to be a fight between Argentina and Chile, or Spain and Portugal? Is the state army the best way to defend a country? What does it mean to defend a country? Is the public good the same for everyone? The Argentine state provides security and justice, but are all Argentines equally defended? Are all areas of Argentina equally safe? Or are some areas safer than others? The same happens in Spain. There is not a common public good. And then, what is defense? What is security? What is justice? For some people, it is a good, and for others, it is an evil. If defense includes the attack on Iraq, there would be a discussion on whether that is defense or not defense. How much defense? What price should it have? What quality? Some people like it, other people don't. So these are topics to debate, security and things like that. They are fascinating topics if one starts studying them. Could they be provided in another way? Would there be a better way to provide them? What prices, mechanisms, and so on? That's the point. So, public goods, roads, and so on. If you didn't bother to learn this, you wouldn't know that roads were formerly provided privately, almost all of them, until the Middle Ages. I discovered that in books about the Middle Ages, not in modern ones. Jack Heers, for example, a historian, a very good medievalist, who is not precisely an anarcho-capitalist. He simply studied how public goods were produced in the Middle Ages, and the roads and bridges were built by someone and then they charged a toll. That was later nationalised by the kings of France. How much did the traveller pay in tolls? How much did he pay in taxes later? And Heers concluded it was much cheaper to pay the tolls, and safer, because the feudal lord, the road owner, made sure it was safe so that many merchants could use the road, and, like this, many other public goods. Heers, for this, is like a gold mine. He explains a lot of things that were made in the Middle Ages that we wouldn't imagine were done like this, overlapping jurisdictions and so on, things that today we don't imagine. Then it leads us to a different vision of public goods, how to finance them, and learn a lot of economics. Third, it also teaches us a little about what the state consists of. That is, the objective of anarcho-capitalism is also a theory of the state, which is not a strange theory of the state either. In fact, in colleges it is quite mainstream, but they tell us, the official version, that the state is a kind of contract, that it was born of a kind of original social contract, that we agreed on a series of things. But, of course, if you analyse that theory a little bit, that theory doesn't bear scrutiny. There is no such contract, and it isn't really a contract. I mean, a contract implies that there are two parties and there is a judge who decides. When I argue with the state, which judge decides between the two parties? It's a strange contract. It is also a contract that none of us signed or anything like that, but the fiction continues even among liberals. Buchanan is a contractualist. Nozick is another contractualist. I mean, it is such a useful thing of fiction that people like a lot. But no, the state is born from conquest, born from super-stratification, born from groups that are placed above others. Historically, it has always been like this, and historically, it has a predatory logic. Genghis Khan, when he plundered Asia, when he plundered China and so on, he didn't do it to eliminate network externalities or information asymmetries. Did Genghis Khan plunder all of that to provide public goods in a correct way? He plundered it to loot, to collect taxes, and so on. When the Tatars invaded Russia, they put people to work, to collect taxes and enslave them. It wasn't because of a market failure problem, an oligopoly problem, or anything like that. The logic through which to explain the state is a predatory logic. But if you investigate, even today, you'll see that there are totally mainstream professors that give an idea of the state in this sense. For example, Charles Tilly, may he rest in peace, was a professor at Columbia University who explained the state like this. In his book, War Making and State Making as Organized Crime, he compares the state to a mafia with schools, but more sophisticated. Also, Michael Mann, Barrington Moore, and other authors adopt that narrative. Even the totally mainstream professor, Professor Margaret Levi, she has a book called The Predatory Theory of Rule, and another book called Of Rule and Revenue, which says that the logic of the state, in all states of the earth, is to obtain the maximum possible income. But not all states operate equally. This is a business matter. Even a really big criminal, a slave trader or something, needs a notebook with the costs and the benefits he will obtain. Even the worst thief must make some money in the operation, and the states, even acting with this logic, which for Levi and other authors is like this, some states focus on the short term and others focus on the longer term. For example, states like Liechtenstein or Luxembourg operate with low taxes. They collect less today, but nowadays are richer than states that operated with higher taxes in the past. It also requires a calculation. It is not a trivial matter. This shows the logic of the state. And what does this have to do with everything you are studying? What we understand by political economy is the economy of the people running the state, the decisions they make. Money is what they decide money is, and the money was slowly nationalized. There are things that are not money just because they've decided it's not money. In many countries around the world, you cannot operate with currencies from another country. Gold and silver are excluded from trade because it is a political decision. The official money is this piece of paper and banknotes I order you to have. And then we rack our brains. M1, M2, M3, the money supply. What M's are you talking about? The government wants to print this amount of money for their things, and they use inflation as a mechanism for income redistribution. The M1, the money supply, we have to set a 3% rule, as Milton Friedman says, right? No, what rule are you talking about? They skip that rule and that's it. They have always skipped it. Because in the end, they are political decisions. It is another kind of logic. A logic that has a lot to do with what we are seeing. It's not security and this or that. If the system is like this, there is no legal certainty stricto sensu. They can change the laws whenever they want. With the mechanisms they want, they can change them however they want, and intervene with the currency whenever they want. They can use central banks to create money however they want, and they can raise prices, regulate production, and so on. But it is a political decision. It's not the Taylor discretion rule or the 3% rule. So, what we call political economy are the decisions that those people take regarding economic aspects, and they use it to obtain income for themselves and for people close to them. As I always say, if I am Genghis Khan and conquered Argentina, for example, I can make you all rich, because you are my friends and you helped me in the fight. I give you the tobacco monopoly. To some of you, I give the telephone monopoly. To someone else, I give the monopoly of salt, or cards, or anything that generates money. And if you have a company, and you are a friend of mine, I don't let the Chinese compete with you. I can make the competing companies go broke with regulations, minimum wages, and things like that. If we look at the economy like this, we do not see it as the state seeking the common good, or progress, or anything like that. It seeks progress just because it is going to give the state more income and it will make people happier. They don't seek progress for the sake of it. Sometimes it's the opposite. They may be deliberate interventions to generate scarcity. Andrei Schleifer explained it very well, a Russian economist living in the Soviet Union. Many times, of course, they know the consequences. For example, we could meet Erdogan, president of Turkey. He is the one who monopolizes oil, and explain Henry Hazlitt's book to him, Economics in One Lesson. Look, you're intervening. He already knows. What he wants is to distribute income to his son-in-law. He's not considering Hazlitt's book, thinking, you are right, my actions generate unemployment. He doesn't care about unemployment. He cares about his interests and those of his people. Then the logic changes if we understand these kind of things. We understand interventionism as all of this, and then it also leads us to something else. One can understand how markets can work in the absence of a state. They tell me, what a utopian thing, but I see that I pick up this phone, I call, I send an email to Alibaba, and things arrive within a week. Or Amazon. Maybe they come from China, or they come to me from a very strange place. They arrive. And which state is there to coordinate that? And do you know where you can see this? In the black markets. How can a black market work in the absence of a state? I see that, for example, even inside prisons in Spain there are drugs. And how can that be? A place surrounded by the state. There is no more state-like a place than that, with cement, barbed wire, a guard every 20 meters. How can drugs get there? Well, the market manages to send drugs. It also allows goods to arrive to me from all over the world, even against the state. It is an idea that is not taught. How markets work and how markets are coordinated between countries. How they establish commercial codes, and a lot of institutions that served historically, clearinghouses, that were created in the absence of the state. So it's very interesting because it not only teaches us about the state, but it teaches us how a market would work in the absence of these regulations. For example, Telegram is an anarcho-capitalist method, precisely to encrypt. At least, originally it was like this. Or Bitcoin. It is explained by Stephen Levy in a book called Crypto. Anything that is internet encryption was made by anarcho-capitalists. They simply did not want the state to access their bank accounts, because the internet, when it was first proposed, anticipated that the state could access any account we had. They could access it directly to see what we had there. Encryption and that kind of stuff derived from an ideology that saw the state as a bad thing, and that some non-violent market mechanism had to be established to stop that. And Bitcoin has a similar logic. It is a monetary system. It is a logic of creating a monetary system where the state is totally absent and cannot intervene. So it has things that are useful in a heuristic way to understand many phenomena of social and political life. We see politics differently, and it is useful to create innovation mechanisms to create new solutions. In the field of law, for example, all the elements of arbitration, compensation, and things like that are inspired a lot by this, or they are being recovered. Ellickson, an American jurist, recovered a lot of formulas from the past to apply them to modern society that could be applied to many lawsuits, and it would be much cheaper and much less expensive and much fairer. A lot of things can be innovated, in everything, in the field of defense, in many areas. You have to think about this in another way. Again, mine is not a vision of a political activist. I'm not saying, let's go to the streets and protest. No, I'm just explaining these things. Because I believe in one thing, the strength of the state, basically. It has several weapons and so on, but a good part of the strength of the state is believing in it. Believing in it as a good thing that can help us. That it is a group of saints looking after the common good, who lose money for the common good. No, we should see it as it always was. It doesn't mean that the current ones are the same as the previous ones, and I believe that, thanks to the market, states become a little civilized. Society, current rulers, are not as criminal as they were in the times of Genghis Khan. They are not as criminal, but you must know their logic is not a logic of the common good. They look for personal interests. Public Choice said that very well, and it is very important to change the way we see it. If we stop believing in the state, it loses half the strength. By just stopping believing in it.
Yo quería hacerte una pregunta. Hablaste de mafia.
I wanted to ask you a question. You talked about mafia as an explanatory theory of the origin of the state, identifying the state as a mafia. I have read a text by Randall Holcomb, you may know him, which suggests that the government is not necessary, but it is inevitable, saying, well, it is true that the private sector could perform the tasks of today's government in a better way, but that's not the focus of the discussion. There is a tendency for groups to loot others, and what has happened historically is that a group saw the convenience of not looting too much and created a state like the one we know today, and therefore, the focus of concern should be how to restrict that state, not remove it, because it will eventually appear again. That's the first question. And the second is there any vision that in an anarcho-capitalist society, people would be grouped in relatively homogeneous communities? For example, there would be a community that would value the traditional family, there would be a community of black people, or there would be another community of white people. And I wonder if that's not a constructivist approach, and a little contrary to the events that occurred in our history. After all, we see that there is a society, for example, in North America, where integration is quite spontaneous and responds to the individual wills of those who are integrated. So, would the idea of communities in the form of ghettos be valid in a world without a state? Or wouldn't there be what exists today, which is cosmopolitanism and integration of different ways of life, of different ethnicities, of men and women, and so on?
Primero, el Estado no tiene por qué aparecer. Una sociedad hipotética.
First, the state doesn't necessarily have to appear. A hypothetical anarcho-capitalist society would have anarcho-capitalists. Holcomb starts from a theoretical point of view. I have a historical point of view. He thinks there would be anarchy, and later there would be a plunderer, and things like that. No, sir. If there is anarcho-capitalism, it will be because there are anarcho-capitalists first that build that. And the anarcho-capitalist society would be much more vigilant, paying attention to those kinds of things. And it's not the same to build it with such aseptic beings that build and then are looted, than to build it with conscious anarcho-capitalists, organized and who know the doctrine. It is not the same. At least in a society like that, there should be a percentage of people who know what the story is about. Maybe not all of them, but they would know and would be aware of that. Also, there is no predator between the states. There is no world state. They can subsist without a state that groups them all together. They can live perfectly well in anarchy. Second, of course, I'm not a constructivist, and that's why I didn't give a description of how it's going to be. Because I don't know how it's going to be, nor will it be a design thing. The classical anarcho-capitalists, for example, talk about defense agencies and other things like that. And I was very inspired by Robert Nisbet's book called Community and Power. It would be like small communities of free choice. more similar to the Amish, keeping their distance, right? Something like that. Each one would have his community, and there could be everything. I believe that anarcho-capitalism, one of the hypotheses that is proposed, derives from secession. A current state has no scale. For the purposes of providing services, it's a state, Liechtenstein and China, Andorra and China. What do the Chinese have that the people from Andorra don't have? Andorra, as I suppose you know, is a microstate between Spain and France, which has 40,000 inhabitants, which I suppose everyone knows. I have been there several times. I saw there was beer, tobacco, food in restaurants, there was Wi-Fi to call. I mean, I don't see what benefit the Chinese has of being so large that the other does not have. But, of course, if secession occurs on a very small scale, it is not very different from anarchy. Liechtenstein, for example, has the right to secede. I think they have the highest income in the world. I don't know if they are 60,000 inhabitants. Every Liechtenstein municipality has the right to secede constitutionally recognized. Somewhere with 3,000 inhabitants could be established. When there are 3,000 inhabitants, 2,000 inhabitants, there is very little difference from anarchy. That anarchy, obviously, would not have political leadership, but it would have some kind of administrator, something like that. But I guess it would vary. There would be multiple possibilities. There would be closed communities, and others who prefer an open community. But then we would have to discuss the cities as they are conceived. To what extent is the design of cities statist or not? Are cities so big due to state influence or not? Countries like ours have an oversized capital. I believe it derives from the state. Other countries, or the later creation of a state, like Switzerland or Germany, do not have a central city. They have a network of many small cities. And maybe we are used to a big city that does everything. But maybe it would be best to think in small cities or in small neighborhoods, networked, well connected, not politically unified. But I don't want to be a constructivist, because I don't know what's going to come out of there. I suppose there would be many different formulas.
¿Cómo se resolvería en un sistema anarcocapitalista?
How would it be resolved in an anarcho-capitalist system? The topic of education, specifically in people of limited resources,
Pues como estamos haciendo ahora, ¿no?
like we are doing now, right?
Bueno, supongo que su idea es que
Today, there is free public education.
No es gratuita, hay que pagar impuestos.
It is not free. You pay for it with your taxes. Let's see. I like reading economic history, right? And I read, for example, Carlo Cipolla. In the Middle Ages until the 18th century, 90% of income was spent on food. In other words, the worker worked extremely hard all day just to eat. And today, at least in countries like ours, food is relatively cheap. So cheap, I believe my students don't even care about food thanks to how cheap it is. Of course, we can find different qualities, from eating spaghetti with tuna or cans of fava beans, which are very cheap, to caviar, high-priced seafood. But food as a good is extremely cheap. And so almost all goods, mobile phones, clothing, everything became cheaper. What I want is for education to be as cheap as those goods. Nowadays it could be. There would be several qualities, obviously. I see that there are tutorials for everything on the internet. There are courses from very good teachers. Coursera, the Khan Academy, tutorials for high school. Textbooks, for example. In Spain, it is mandatory to buy them. Why can't they be downloaded from the internet in PDF form? Who is making education more expensive? Basic education can be very cheap. Now, there would be different qualities. The teacher is not going to disappear. He would have a different job. And why does the same academic curriculum have to be taught to all children? Maybe the school itself is not the right way to educate. I am not a specialist, but I prefer the modular system. I mean, does the boy or girl like music? They go to a music academy, they go to a music class. Is the child good at maths? He goes to a Kumon Academy just to learn mathematics. Or he attends a course that can be accessed for free on the internet. Or he can hire specialized teachers to study history, art, a lot of things. You don't have to necessarily give the same curriculum to all children, all ages, and all Argentines. I think it could be much cheaper in many aspects, just like medicine, just like many other areas. I think that, as the system is set up, a totally public system, a state system, there is no price competition, there is no quality competition, there is no incentive to improve the service, because there is no competition between schools, at least for the most part with public systems. The competition would be in quality and price, and surely many suitable mixed systems could be offered. Look at the children. I see the boys in my class, everything they know was self-learned. They explain things to me, in fact. They know how to use computers, mobile phones, all these modern things. Everything I have on the internet, including what we are doing now, has been taught to me by them. They know, and I ask them, how did you learn? And they say, some of us talk to each other, we have chats, and we talk. And why can't they learn like this? There are many ways to modulate. There are these books that were made by Thule, The Beautiful Tree, about how schools can be cheap in many ways. Much of the school also is not just the school, it's the building and all the things around it, or the travel costs of parents, in time and work comforts, to take the children to that place. Could other types of systems be established? I'm just asking, I don't know. I think they should try to make it cheaper, just as food became cheaper, just as clothes became cheaper, just as telephones became cheaper, just as cars became cheaper, just as all the goods we have today, except for those that are monopolized by the state. Curiously, they don't go down in price, nor does its quality increase substantially. We should ask ourselves why. I keep teaching as in Plato's time. I think something could be improved, and this type of thing right here, things that are scalable, I can give a class to 1 as to 1,000,000 at no high cost. It is almost free. It could be done in 1,000 different ways, but there is no incentive to do that. The state has two derived powers. Power always comes from physical force. One is the power of money, the monopolization they have made of money and credit, which is used to make payments and extract rent from society. And the other is the structures of political influence, of which schools and universities form a part. Of course, they are interested in having that controlled, because it is a mechanism of generating loyalty to the state. It is not only a learning system, it is a system of generating loyalty. It teaches things, but it also teaches state values and teaches everyone the same history, language, and geography. Geography, I always say it, is the worst subject of all. It is the most manipulative, although it seems like it isn't. That's why I think it could easily be cheaper. There are 1,000 ways.
Hay otra pregunta de si el anarcocapitalismo o el paleolibertarianismo.
There is another question. Does anarcho-capitalism or paleo-libertarianism discuss economic topics and leaves aside cultural issues?
Sí, claro que hay ese debate cultural, ¿no? Porque hay libertarios como más libertinos, podemos decirlo así.
Yes, of course, there is that cultural debate. Although there are libertarians, Rothbard calls them libertines, not me, I'm not making fun of them, it's a term he uses, who think that since anarcho-capitalism defends that the state should not intervene in drugs and other things, it would mean those things are okay. Indeed, the state should not intervene in moral issues, but there are things that, personally, don't seem right to me. And I don't think that they help promote a capitalist society. I'm not prohibiting anything, I'm simply saying that certain conservative values should be spread through culture. That's what paleolibertarians defend, and I'm very interested in the cultural aspects. I defend this, again, without imposing anything to anyone. That's clear to me. Without imposing anything to anyone, through imitation and so on. That's what Rothbard said, especially in the last part of his life. In a country of drunks or drug addicts, in Africa, in Ethiopia, in Somalia, they chew something called cat. They chew it and stay there all day. Well, it's okay. They are free, I am not going to prohibit them. But it is difficult for anything capitalist to come out of there, or a society of progress. Usually, societies that are capitalist are accompanied by moral values that are quite strong and quite ascetic. It's nothing new. Max Weber explained it a long time ago. In the wrong way, in my opinion. But the idea that values are what is really relevant when building capitalism is an idea that is very important for me. We must discuss what they are and how to establish them, and above all, establishing them in a non-obligatory way. But of course, they are important.
Para hacerla más cortita la pregunta, 3 libros.
To make the question shorter, what are 3 books or 3 authors to learn about anarcho-capitalism or the predatory theory of the state?
Oppenheimer, El Estado.
Franz Oppenheimer, The State, for example, is a very good book. And also these books that are in English of Rousseau, who was a classical liberal, Freedom and Domination. It's very good about the state. And all the work of Charles Tilly in general, Coercion, Capital and the European States. He explains it very well. He explains the origin of states just as they are today. Gianfranco Poggi too, he explains it well. And then of course you must read books of Austrian economics. I have bibliographies. Every year I post a small bibliography of books that catch my attention. I really like Stanislav Andreski. There is a book, it is hard to find, which I like a lot, which is called Parasitism and Subversion, The Case of Latin America. He explains the states like no one else. And then, of course, all the theories of Robert Nozick. I wouldn't say he is a utopian anarchist. He doesn't seem that way to me. In fact, he later renounced these things. In Socratic Puzzles, for example, he renounced these things a little. He has good arguments, especially when he talks about exploitation, about that basketball player. But when he talks about the state, I think he's a bit naive. Rothbard criticizes him in a work called Robert Nozick and the Immaculate Conception of the State, in The Ethics of Liberty. And you should read Austrian economics, books about money like those of Huerta de Soto, when he talks about socialism, or when he talks about cycles, or the books by Mises. They are about Austrian economics, or Rothbard. Rothbard is quite complete in these aspects, because Rothbard sees the state and sees the intervention. For example, in Power and Market, sees state intervention just as we can see price intervention, wage intervention, and regulation and taxes. He doesn't see them from a normal point of view, but he sees them from a statist point of view and sees how each of the interventions tries to obtain the highest possible income. It is good to return to the Italian tradition of public finance. Almost all of them are translated. Einaudi or De Viti Di Marco or Mauro Faisiani. They explain public finance very well from the consumer's point of view, not from the point of view of the state, because the treasury books normally teach the ruler to obtain the maximum possible income. These authors explain how you can be defended and the possible ways the state tries to get taxes. Sometimes I publish bibliographies of the books that catch my attention. I have them on the Juan de Mariana Institute page.
Esto de este auge de la tecnología y las comunicaciones
This
y el
boom
Big
in
Data,
technology and communications and big data, does it help a society to become more anarcho-capitalist, or is it actually going against it? Or is it something more in favor of statism?
Tecnología es neutra. A mí también son temas que me interesan bastante.
Technology is neutral. These are topics that interest me quite a bit. Lewis Mumford explains it very well in Technics and Civilization. Technology is neutral. It depends on how it is used. The internet can be a huge source of freedom, but also a huge source of control. Everything we're doing now is recorded. Everything is recorded and registered. And big data information technologies can know perfectly who we are in this meeting and what each of us are saying. But, of course, it also gives us the opportunity to get to know each other, to talk about strange things and other things like that. So, big data, like any technology, is neutral. It depends on how it is used. Mumford is very interesting. For example, all your accounts are on the internet, and it's very easy to block them, probably by pressing a button. That's why Bitcoin is interesting. A central banker could block your accounts. At least he has the technology to do it. Or control everything, not just how much you spent, but what you spent it on. Because the details of the purchase receipt is not just the price anymore, it's everything you bought and where you bought it and so on. That's why cash is still a good defense against all this. But of course, technology can give a lot of freedom to educate, to read books, to talk about strange things. It has a double edge.
Dada esta teoría predatoria del Estado, que de alguna manera habilita la discusión sobre el anarcocapitalismo,
Given this predatory theory of the state, which in some way enables the discussion on anarcho-capitalism, I ask myself, if every member of the state has the will to oppress others and loot, how does a liberal politician fit into that theory? A politician who has the good intentions of maximizing individual freedoms, for example. It would seem that every politician is disposable and is an enemy.
No, a ver, para mí no son todos igual de malos, igual que cualquier otro colectivo.
No, let's see. Not all of them are just as bad. Just like in any other group, they are not all exactly equally bad. And some do less damage than others, as far as I can tell. Now, not only radical authors are saying it. Friedrich Hayek explains it very well in The Road to Serfdom, in a chapter called Why the Worst Get on Top. He explains that, in order to rule a political machine, it is not only about winning the elections. You have to command, you must know how to govern others, you have to have a certain degree of evil or killer instinct to do these kinds of things. And usually when you're in power, you have pressure from your people. I worked hard for Mr. Carino for him to be liberal, and now Mr. Carino says he doesn't hook me up. You are not going to hook me up. I worked hard, they insulted me on the internet, I spent money on you, and now you are not going to give me anything? Then you run out of followers the next day. As Mancur Olson would say, in order to organize a political machine, you have to give some kind of selective incentive to your people, right? You have to keep them more or less happy. But once you enter into those dynamics, it is very difficult to get out of them. Now, not all of them are equally bad, that's clear to me, but they all lie, that's also clear to me. All politicians that defend liberalism have lied. All of them, the ones I saw. None carried out these kinds of liberal agendas. A lady asked me about the Catholic Church. I am Catholic, and I'm very interested in that topic too. Rothbard explains it very well. An anarcho-capitalist society is not atomistic either. It needs elements of cohesion, a series of common and shared values. First, an element of community that can replace the culture of the state. Look at the church. I walk through my city, which is an old, ancient city, and just by looking, what do I see? I see a hospital, I see an orphanage, I see a school for the poor. And who built that? In the Middle Ages, in the 16th century, with infinitely less resources than today. How could that be built? Institutions, charity, things like that. The churches built that, the Catholic Church and other churches, and they were the ones that provided services and established a lot of things. They also provided shared values. So it's a kind of cement which partly replaces the state. Just like, for example, the idea of nation. Not the political nation, but the idea of a community. Although you each live your own lives, you are Argentines. You have a certain cultural solidarity. You eat meat, you like tango. I'm using cliches, but there is an element of social organization, of community, without the need of a state structure. So there are elements of cohesion of this kind, and it is important not to lose them. A church involved in politics is wrong for me, also a political nation, but the concept of religion, with its organizations, is fine. In fact, a good number of anarcho-capitalists are Catholics, and many are very Catholic.
Entre eso hay una
Is
relación
there a
directa.
direct relationship there?
No lo sé, pero Rothbard preguntaba si se había convertido. Porque su visión,
I don't know, but Rothbard said they asked him if he had converted, because his vision of economic history, for example, in an Austrian perspective of the history of economic thought, is very pro-Catholic. He was Jewish, I think he was an atheist, but his vision of the world was Catholic, and he defended the Catholic religion in some of his works for the social values it had. Lew Rockwell, and many of them have a Catholic background, and they also see it as perfectly coherent. Tom Woods explains it in The Church and the Market, a Catholic defense of the free economy.
Es sobre el liberalismo español del siglo XIX, centralista y el tradicionalismo.
His question is about Spanish centralist liberalism in the 19th century and traditionalism, autonomists. So I guess that there were 2 points of view. Do you have any opinion about the debate between centralists and autonomists, which is something Argentina also experienced, the federal and the unitary?
sí, porque el liberalismo hispano es de raíz jacobina.
Yes, Hispanic liberalism has Jacobin roots. They want to hide it. Their constitutions have a lot of French inspiration. So the idea of a united France, equal with all the French alike, everyone speaking the same language, unifying weights and measures, for example, and establishing a series of factors of social homogenization. And the traditionalists defended the fueros, special jurisdictions. I think Rothbard said that the greatest Spanish invention of all time was the fueros, the idea that each locality had its own laws, and the state couldn't interfere with those laws. It was a system united by some kind of cultural value, united for some kind of monarchy, but very decentralized. I always say that modern liberalism should be built on some of the values of traditionalism and not of Hispanic liberalism. Hispanic liberalism was very Jacobin. It built the state in Spain. And the traditionalists are very anti-statist. And that anti-statist vision that they had, the vision of Don Enrique Gil Robles, is terrible, right? He compared the state to a bandit, a thief, in his paper on political law. We should build on that idea. We would have to build ideas on that basis. That's what I'm saying. Obviously, not all their ideas work for today's world.
¿Cómo se podría evitar que corporaciones terminen coerciendo al resto de la población?
Let's ask you a final question. How could we prevent corporations from ending up coercing the rest of the population and becoming a new state?
La corporación es un invento capitalista. El Estado es una corporación.
First, the corporation is a capitalist invention. The state is a corporation, in the sense that their bosses are irresponsible regarding, for example, the country's economic results. I mean, who was that president who had to escape in a helicopter? What was his name? De la Rúa, right? Let's imagine that he ruined Argentina. He didn't pay anything out of his own pocket. He sent the bill to the rest of the Argentines or to the next president. It's like a corporation, it's like a company. The manager can ruin the company, but he loses nothing, because it is a fictitious organization, and the state has something of a corporation too. The state, when created as a corporation, creates modern companies in its likeness. Modern companies have this characteristic too. So, corporations, to a large extent, are an invention of the state, and many times the most left-wing part of anarcho-capitalism comes out from me. Mutualism, Kevin Carson and other authors. Corporations, without the support of the state, would never be so big. It would be very difficult for them to be that big, because they are very protected. Precisely due to bankruptcy laws, public limited companies and the political support it gives them. Typically, states save certain companies that are close to it. A shopkeeper who sells tobacco or sells fruit will not be saved if he goes bankrupt, a tavern keeper and so on. But states do save certain corporations. They are very protected. It is very difficult for a capitalist company to become so big without the help of the state. But again, we would be alert. Furthermore, companies do not have a monopoly on physical force.
Profesor Bastos, ha sido todo un lujo.
Professor Bastos, it has been a pleasure. Extraordinary presentation, and I think they enjoyed it a lot. There were many participants. There are 80 now, there were 90 at one point. I thank everyone who participated, mainly to you, Professor, for the talk, and the predisposition, for the time and for responding to all the questions with so much encouragement.
Es un honor para mí poder hablar con ustedes.
It is an honor for me to be able to speak with you, because I have always very much idealized Hesiade. It influenced me a lot, and it's nice to see that there are many people at least interested. You don't necessarily have to agree. They are complex topics, and they are highly discussed topics. I am not clear about many things, and I have changed my mind many times on them. And so it should be. Thank you for your kindness, and I hope to see you soon.